The silence before the stormed courtroom was filled with the low hum of whispers. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, and every breath seemed to wait for one man, Keanu Reeves. He walked in quietly, dressed in a simple black suit, eyes calm but shadowed with something deeper. Everyone expected a movie star, but what they saw was a man carrying the weight of something unseen. Across the room, Alexandra Grant sat with her lawyers. Her face was unreadable, her eyes steady but tired. No one understood what had brought them here. They had been partners in art, in life, and in love for years. People admired them, the grace, the maturity, the kindness they showed to each other, and yet, now they were standing on opposite sides of a courtroom, about to face something that neither fame nor fortune could protect them from. As the judge entered, Keanu's hands tightened around the table. Alexandra didn't look at him. Her lawyer stood and spoke first. "Your Honor," she began softly, "this case is not about money or fame. It's about trust, and the betrayal of that trust." Keanu's heart sank at those words. Betrayal, such a simple word, but it cut through the air like a knife. He had faced loss, loneliness, and pain before, but this was different. It was personal. The lawyer continued, describing letters, promises, and a project that had once been theirs together, a charity for young artists. Born out of love and hope, Alexandra claimed that Keanu had withdrawn funds without her knowledge. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes glistened. She wasn't angry. She was hurt. Keanu looked down. He knew the truth wasn't as simple as it sounded. Yes, he had moved the funds, but not for himself, not for greed. It was for someone who needed help, a young artist battling cancer who had once called Alexandra her hero. Keanu hadn't told her, thinking he could fix it quietly. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to turn compassion into a headline. But that silence had brought them here. As the testimony went on, the judge asked Keanu if he wanted to respond. The entire courtroom turned to him. The flashes of cameras stopped. Even the air felt heavy. He rose slowly. His voice was soft, steady. "Your Honor," he began, "I never meant to hurt Alexandra. She is one of the most genuine souls I've ever met. Every decision I made with a heart that wanted to protect what we built. Maybe I made a mistake in silence, but never in intention." Alexandra's eyes lifted for the first time. Something flickered there, confusion, pain, maybe even a trace of the love that still lingered between them. The lawyer objected, saying feelings weren't facts. The judge asked for proof. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "These are letters," he said quietly, "from the people we helped together. One of them, she didn't make it, but before she passed, she wrote to Alexandra and me. Her words reminded me why we started this. I couldn't let that dream die." He placed the envelope on the table. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the memory of that girl's voice. The courtroom stayed silent. Alexandra didn't move. Her lawyer looked unsure for the first time, and in that stillness, everyone began to see not a battle between lovers, but a moment between two souls trying to understand where love had turned into misunderstanding. The judge called for a break. As people stood and whispered, Alexandra stayed seated. She stared at the letters on the table. Keanu didn't look at her. He simply sat, eyes closed, as if the entire world had fallen silent around him. When she finally stood, she walked past him, slow, hesitant, and whispered something so faint that only he could hear. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He opened his eyes, but she was already gone. And in that moment, Keanu realized that sometimes silence isn't peace, it's distance. And sometimes, love isn't lost by betrayal, but by the fear of being misunderstood. He sat there alone, in the middle of the courtroom, with the echo of her words haunting every heartbeat. The weight of truth. When the break ended, Keanu sat quietly in his seat, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. The courtroom lights seemed harsher now. Alexandra had not returned yet, and part of him wondered if she would. He replayed her words again and again in his mind. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He had asked himself that same question for weeks. Why hadn't he called her that night? Why hadn't he explained before the world learned about it through cold documents and missing numbers? Maybe because he feared losing her trust more than anything. Or maybe because he had already lost too much in life and didn't know how to face losing her too. The door opened and Alexandra walked back in. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. She looked tired, her eyes red, like she had been crying. She avoided looking at Keanu, yet her presence pulled him in like gravity. The judge returned, and the hearing resumed. Alexandra's lawyer spoke again, but this time the tone was softer. "We acknowledge Mr. Reeves's kindness," she said, "but the court still requires clarity. Intentions aside, actions matter." Keanu nodded. He agreed with her. Actions did matter. And maybe his silence had been his biggest mistake. His lawyer stood and handed the judge the letters Keanu had brought. The judge opened one of them and began to read. The courtroom fell silent again. The words were from a young girl named Ella, just 17. She had written about her dream of painting something that would make people believe in hope again. She thanked Keanu and Alexandra for funding her treatments and for believing in her art. At the end, she had written, "Please never stop doing what you do, because people like me survive a little longer knowing people like you exist." A tear slipped down Alexandra's face. She didn't wipe it away. The judge looked at Keanu. "These letters are powerful, but I need to understand. Why didn't you inform your partner about the transfer of funds?" Keanu's voice broke slightly as he answered, "Because I didn't want her to see the pain of choosing between saving one life and saving many. I thought if I carried that burden alone, she wouldn't have to." For a moment, even the journalists lowered their pens. The courtroom wasn't watching a celebrity anymore. They were watching a man who had lived through loss, who understood the price of love and the silence it sometimes demanded. Alexandra's lawyer whispered something, but Alexandra raised her hand, stopping her. "Your Honor," she said softly, "may I speak?" The judge nodded. Alexandra stood and turned toward Keanu. "You always carried pain like it was your duty," she said, "and I admired that. But love is not protection through silence, Keanu. It's honesty through pain." Her voice trembled now, but she continued, "I thought you didn't trust me. I thought you shut me out. I didn't know you were trying to protect me. Maybe that's where we both failed, you in silence and me in assumption." Keanu's eyes lifted slowly, meeting hers. There was no anger there, no blame, just sadness, the kind that comes when love has been bruised but not broken. The judge cleared his throat softly. "This doesn't feel like a case of betrayal," he said. "It feels like a case of misunderstanding. I'm ordering both parties to mediation before we continue further. Sometimes resolution doesn't come from judgment, but from conversation." The gavel fell, and the session ended for the day. As the room emptied, Alexandra gathered her papers quietly. She turned to leave, but paused beside him. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Do you remember that first mural we painted together?" Keanu smiled faintly. "The one we ruined because the rain washed it away." She nodded, a tiny smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe some things need to be washed before they can begin again." He looked at her, searching for what she meant, but she was already walking toward the door. Outside, flashes erupted again as reporters swarmed her, shouting questions. Keanu stayed behind, still seated, watching the door close. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to exhale, not in relief, but in quiet acceptance. He had been speechless before her accusation. Now he was speechless before her understanding. The truth had not cleared everything, but it had cracked open the silence. And sometimes, that was where healing began. The room where memories lived. The next morning, Los Angeles was calm but heavy with gray clouds. The courthouse loomed like a silent monument, but today wasn't about arguments or evidence. It was about mediation, a quiet room where two people who once shared everything would now try to rebuild what misunderstanding had broken. Keanu arrived early. He always did. He sat in the hallway, staring at the small painting that hung on the wall, a landscape of two trees standing apart, their roots touching beneath the surface. He smiled faintly. It reminded him of them, distant now, but still connected somewhere deep below words and time. When Alexandra arrived, she didn't say anything. Her hair was tied back, her eyes softer than the day before. She looked tired but peaceful, as if she had made a decision overnight, not to fight, but to listen. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, welcomed them inside. The room was small and quiet. Sunlight filtered through the window, landing between them like a line they weren't ready to cross yet. "We're not here to judge," the mediator said. "We're here to understand. Both of you have built something meaningful together. Let's start there." Alexandra spoke first. Her voice was calm, but her words trembled with emotion. "When I heard about the missing funds, I felt betrayed. Not because of the money, but because I thought I didn't matter anymore. It felt like you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." Keanu looked down at his hands. "I did trust you," he said softly. "Too much, maybe. I just didn't want you to carry another heartbreak. I thought I was protecting you from more pain." She sighed, shaking her head slightly. "You always do that, Keanu. You build walls out of kindness, but kindness can become distance when you don't let someone in." Those words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he saw flashes of his past, the people he had lost, the times he had chosen silence over vulnerability, thinking it was strength. But maybe strength wasn't silence. Maybe it was learning to speak even when the voice shakes. The mediator leaned forward. "Sometimes we protect people in ways that make them feel abandoned. Both of you seem to have loved deeply, but also misunderstood deeply." Alexandra's eyes glistened. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered. "But I didn't recognize you anymore when I saw the headlines. I thought fame had changed you. I thought you stopped believing in us." Keanu finally looked at her, really looked at her. "Nothing in this world could ever make me stop believing in you. I just didn't know how to let you see the broken parts of me. I thought you'd walk away if you saw how much I still carry." A long silence filled the room. Alexandra reached for the envelope of letters that still lay on the table from the previous day. She opened the one from Ella again, her eyes softening at the girl's handwriting. "She saw both of us," Alexandra said. "Not just our work, but our hearts. Maybe we forgot that somewhere along the way." Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe we forgot that love isn't about perfect timing or perfect choices. It's about showing up, even when everything feels impossible." The mediator smiled gently. "You two aren't enemies," she said. "You're just a people who let silence grow too big between them. You can still build again, if you choose to." They sat quietly, letting the words sink in. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window. Alexandra stood up and walked toward it, watching the droplets slide down the glass. "Do you remember when it rained on our first mural?" she asked softly. Keanu smiled. "I do. You said the rain was trying to tell us something." She turned back toward him, her eyes calm but glistening. "Maybe it's telling us something again." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, he saw a spark of the woman he once knew, the artist, the dreamer, the person who had taught him that love could be quiet and still be powerful. The mediator ended the session, asking them to return the next day. As they left the room, Keanu held the door open for her. She paused for a moment, meeting his eyes. "You know," she said softly, "maybe the world doesn't need to understand what happened between us. Maybe only we do." He nodded. "Maybe that's enough." As she walked away, Keanu stood in the hallway, watching her silhouette fade around the corner. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel lost. He just felt human, fragile, flawed, but still capable of hope. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. Something was changing, slowly, quietly, just like the rain outside. The confession beneath the rain. The rain didn't stop that night. It poured down on Los Angeles, like the sky was trying to wash away everything heavy and unspoken. Keanu sat alone in his small home, lights dim, a cup of tea untouched beside him. The world outside felt quiet, yet inside him there was a storm. He stared at the letters again, the ones from the charity, the words that had brought both pain and healing. But tonight, it was Alexandra's voice that echoed louder. "You build walls out of kindness." She was right. He had spent a lifetime trying to protect people from his sadness, thinking it was noble. But maybe all he had done was isolate himself. Every wall he built was made of love, yet those walls had become prisons of silence. A knock at the door startled him. For a second, he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again, soft but certain. When he opened it, Alexandra was standing there, soaked from the rain, her hair sticking to her face, her coat dripping water onto the floor. She looked at him for a moment, as if searching for permission to speak. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. He stepped aside. Wordlessly. She walked in, wrapping her arms around herself. The warmth of the house hit her immediately, but her eyes stayed restless, flickering over the familiar space. Everything was still the same: the books, the art, the quiet. Only the air between them had changed. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," Keanu said quietly. She smiled faintly. "I needed to see you before tomorrow." He nodded, unsure what else to say. She took a slow breath, then turned toward him. "I kept thinking about everything you said. About Ella. About the reason you didn't tell me. And I realized I wasn't really angry about the money. I was angry that you decided for both of us." Her voice broke slightly. "You took the pain alone when we could have shared it. You thought silence was love, but silence only made me feel invisible." He looked at her, guilt heavy in his chest. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," she said gently. "But love isn't protection, Keanu. It's participation. It's letting someone see your scars and your fears, not hiding them to seem strong." Her words hit him like soft thunder. He had spent years surviving, always holding his pain quietly, believing that silence was the only way to keep love safe. But in doing so, he had built walls so high that even the people who loved him couldn't reach him. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling for words. "I've lost people before. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep the pain from spreading. I didn't want you to see me break." She stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "But that's the thing, Keanu. You never needed to be perfect for me. You just needed to be real." The room went still. Only the sound of rain filled the space, soft and steady. She reached out, hesitated for a second, then placed her hand on his. It was a simple touch, but it felt like forgiveness. He looked down at their hands, then back at her. "I never wanted to lose you." "You didn't," she whispered. "You just lost sight of us for a while." They stood there, the quiet between them no longer painful but peaceful. The rain outside began to ease, turning into a gentle drizzle. Alexandra walked over to the small table by the window where a single painting rested, unfinished. It was something they had started together years ago, but never completed. Two figures walking in opposite directions, their shadows touching. She traced the brush strokes with her fingers. "We never finished this," she said softly. Keanu joined her. "Maybe we still can." She turned toward him, a small smile finally breaking through. Maybe it wasn't a promise. It wasn't a decision. But it was a beginning, quiet, fragile, and real. When she finally left that night, she paused at the door. "Tomorrow," she said, "let's tell the court the truth, not about the money, but about the story behind it. Maybe people need to know what kindness really looks like." He nodded. "Together," he said. She smiled. Together. When the door closed behind her, Keanu exhaled deeply. For the first time in months, the silence didn't hurt. It felt alive, like something had finally shifted. He looked out at the clearing sky, the city lights glowing softly in the distance. Love hadn't left him. It had just been waiting for him to stop hiding. The truth that healed the room. Next morning arrived with sunlight breaking through thin clouds. It felt like the world itself had decided to breathe again. Keanu stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Though his reflection wasn't what he focused on, he was thinking about what Alexandra had said the night before. Let's tell the truth. Not about the money, but about the story behind it. When he reached the courthouse, reporters were already lined up outside. Flashes went off as soon as they saw him, but this time, Keanu didn't lower his head. He smiled politely, calm and collected, and walked through the entrance. There was a sense of quiet strength about him, not the strength of fame, but of peace. Alexandra arrived a few minutes later. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair loose, her face calm. When she saw him, she nodded gently. No words, just a silent understanding. Whatever happened today, they would face it together. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than before. Fewer reporters, fewer whispers, just a quiet sense that something important was about to unfold. The judge entered, and the session began. Alexandra's lawyer rose first, but to everyone's surprise, Alexandra placed a hand on her arm and stood up herself. "Your Honor," she said softly. I wish to address the court personally. The judge nodded. Intrigued, Alexandra stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Over the last few weeks, there's been misunderstanding, pain, and confusion. I came here believing I was betrayed. I thought someone I loved and trusted had gone behind my back. But I was wrong. She paused, her eyes glancing toward Keanu. This wasn't betrayal. It was silence, silence made out of love. The courtroom grew still. Even the sound of typing from the journalist stopped. She continued. The funds in question were used to help a young artist named Ella. She was part of the charity we created. She passed away, but before she did, she sent us letters that reminded us why we started this journey in the first place. Keanu didn't steal from us. He acted from compassion, from the same heart that made me love him in the first place. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. We both made mistakes. I mistook silence for betrayal. He mistook love for protection. And in doing so, we forgot that honesty is the only bridge that keeps hearts connected. She turned toward the judge, then to the audience. So today, I withdraw my case. There's no theft here, only misunderstanding. And if there's one thing this has taught me, it's that love cannot survive without communication. We need to speak, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The judge looked at her with respect. Ms. Grant, are you certain? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'm certain. The judge turned to Keanu. Mr. Reeves, do you have anything to add? Keanu stood slowly. Only this, he said softly. I've lived long enough to know that kindness isn't always loud, and love isn't always easy. I made a mistake thinking silence was safety. But Alexandra taught me that love deserves truth, even when it's uncomfortable. He paused for a moment, his voice breaking slightly. We didn't just build a charity together. We built something that inspired others to believe again. And I'll always be grateful for her, for reminding me that strength isn't about hiding your pain. It's about sharing it and still standing tall. When he finished, the room was quiet, not with shock, but with something deeper: respect, compassion, understanding. The judge smiled faintly. Perhaps this is one of the few cases that reminds us law is not just about justice, but about humanity. Case dismissed. The sound of the gavel echoed gently. Keanu turned toward Alexandra. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both unsure of what came next. She smiled, a real, soft smile, and whispered, "You finally spoke." He smiled back. "You finally listened." They both laughed quietly, a small, shared relief breaking through the tension. As they left the courtroom together, the reporters rushed toward them, shouting questions. Alexandra glanced at him and said, "Should we say something?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head gently. "No. I think our silence can finally mean peace." She nodded. Together they walked past the cameras, not as a couple trying to fix a broken story, but as to people who had finally learned what it meant to understand. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air was fresh, the sunlight golden, and for the first time in months, Keanu felt light, not because everything was perfect, but because the truth had finally set both of them free. In the distance, Alexandra's car was waiting. She turned to him one last time before leaving. "I'll call you," she said softly. "I'll be here," he replied. As she drove away, Keanu stood on the courthouse steps, the wind brushing against his face. He looked up at the sky, clear, endless, full of quiet promise. Sometimes healing didn't come in grand gestures or loud apologies. Sometimes it came in understanding, in truth, in letting go of what once hurt. And that morning, Keanu Reeves understood that the most powerful love stories are not about perfection, but about forgiveness. The Art of Forgiveness. Weeks passed after the courtroom closed its doors on their story. Yet the echoes of that day stayed with Keanu. The silence he once feared now felt different, not empty, but full of reflection. He spent his mornings painting again, something he hadn't done in years. Each brushstroke felt like a release, every color like a quiet prayer. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across his studio floor, he stood before the unfinished canvas he and Alexandra had started years ago. The two figures walking apart, their shadows touching. For the first time, he picked up his brush and began to paint again. He didn't think, he just moved. The way he used to when creating felt like breathing. As the hours passed, the painting changed. The two figures were no longer walking apart. They were walking toward each other, their shadows merging into one. The colors glowed softly, shades of blue, gold, and white. It was no longer a picture of distance. It was a picture of reunion. He smiled faintly. It felt like closure. But just as he stepped back to admire it, there was a gentle knock at the studio door. His heart paused. He knew that knock. When he opened the door, Alexandra stood there, calm, radiant, holding a small brown folder in her hands. "You're painting again," she said softly, her eyes moving to the canvas behind him. He nodded. "Yeah, trying to finish what we started." She stepped inside, her gaze lingering on the painting. "You changed it." "I did," he said quietly. "It didn't feel right anymore." "They weren't supposed to walk away," she smiled. "No, they weren't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was gentle this time, not tense, not cold. It was the silence of two souls that had already said everything they needed to. Alexandra held out the folder. "These are the letters, the originals. I thought you should keep them." He took them carefully, his eyes soft. "Thank you. I've also been thinking," she continued. "Maybe we can restart the charity, but differently this time, with full transparency, shared decisions, and shared trust. No more silence." Keanu's eyes lifted slowly to hers. "You really want to do that? After everything?" She nodded. "Yes, because what we built mattered. Not because of us, but because of the people it helped. And maybe, after everything, this is how we start again. Not as lovers who lost their way, but as friends who found their purpose again." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Friends who believe in second chances." "Exactly," she whispered. They stood side by side, staring at the painting together. For the first time in years, there was no bitterness, no guilt, no lingering anger. Just peace, a quiet understanding that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning to live with it gently. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You know," she said softly, "I watched an interview of you once, years ago. You said, grief changes shape, but it never ends. Maybe love is like that too. Maybe it changes shape, but it never really ends." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I think you're right." She smiled back, her eyes kind, then stepped out into the sunlight. After she left, Keanu walked back to the canvas. He stood there for a long time, looking at what they had created and what they had healed. He didn't feel sadness anymore. He felt gratitude. He gently set down his brush, took one of the letters from the folder, and read it again. "Dear Keanu and Alexandra, you once told me that art is just another form of love, that it connects people even when words fail. So when you feel lost, paint. When you feel hurt, forgive. And when you find each other again, remember that love was never the mistake." Silence was. Keanu smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you, Ella," he whispered. He picked up his brush one last time and signed the corner of the painting, "Hope Reborn." As the evening light filled the studio, he stepped outside, breathing in the quiet. Life didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. It just needed truth, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was setting in shades of gold and red, and whispered to himself, "Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape." And for the first time in a long time, Keanu Reeves smiled, not as a movie star, not as a man who had suffered, but as a human being who had finally made peace with the past and opened his heart to tomorrow.